Oh, hello there, and welcome to episode 9 of our Dirty Trail circumnavigation of the Iberian Peninsula. Thank you for showing up, and if this short film isn't short enough for you, I'm very pleased you stopped by all the same. And to anyone along for the whole ride, I hope there's at least something in all these amateur efforts to interest, amuse, or entertain you. After breakfast, we left Setcases early on a beautiful sunlit summer's morning, the air fresh and cool from overnight rain and the Pyrenees looking greener and lovelier than ever. The route took us from main road to country lane, from then always climbing for mile upon mile until we reached the village of Gyaradebesh, its houses clinging to steep edges and commanding great views across the valley. This marked the start of the day's dirt roads, continuing to climb steeply until eventually levelling out at a little over 6,000 feet, or about 2,000 metres. What a morning! The early sunshine picked out bright yellow gorse against the vibrant greens and bluest of blue skies. Was this weather window going to stay open for long in these mountains? Nah, of course not. The altitude was just enough for me to detect a very slight breathlessness from my 790's usually frisky motor. As the heat of the day grew, Noz's 1190, which had suffered since day one from an intermittent reluctance to rev over 5,000, began to behave in a particularly recalcitrant fashion way up here far above the valley bottoms. Progressive failure of one of the bike's 4 coil packs was the prime suspect, and the problem didn't seem to threaten anything worse than mild annoyance for the rider, but did mean that periodically I would encounter my friend sitting in the shade of various trees, waiting for the whole plot to cool down in order to permit further progress. As we proceeded with the day's ride, however, Noza would discover something of a more mechanical and definitely more pressing nature. To have such clear weather to enjoy the spectacular views was a real treat and would greatly affect a decision we would make later that night when we finally reached Andorra. If you're contemplating tackling these adventure country tracks routes, riding heavy adventure motorcycles, and you have little or no tarmac riding experience, this series of videos should be giving you a decent idea of what to expect. And as you can see, the vast majority of riding cannot be described as technical or in any way challenging. However, it should be said that as with any unsurfaced road, where there are steeper sections there is almost always some degree of washout, where rainwater or swollen streams have created ruts as they find their lines of least resistance on their inexorable downhill travels. These are fairly big mountains, and nobody can predict from one day to the next how a heavy storm might affect any particular trail. Of course, you can always turn round and go back if you happen upon a section that looks to be beyond your pay grade, but the main advice I'd offer would be this. Oh, before I offer any advice, however, you will already know if you've watched earlier episodes in this series that my advice quite possibly should be ignored altogether. But here goes anyway.
Be in a heap somewhere up there.
First, practice at home and challenge yourself with ever more difficult dirt sections before you set out for foreign shores. Identify weaker points on your riding and work on them. It's tempting to get to the top of a tricky climb and, sweating profusely and gasping for air, say to yourself, "Phew, I only just made it up that. Well done me. On I go." But consider turning around, going back down and riding up it again and again and again until it doesn't make you breathless, sweaty or relieved to reach the top, but becomes easy peasy. What was all the fuss about? Second nature. All motorcycling, if not all life, is a confidence trick, and relentless practice is the way to gain that confidence. You'll find it works a whole lot better than ego when it comes to staying aboard your motorcycle. On this trip, for example, I made the discovery that rutted downhill sections where the weather had rendered the surface particularly slippery were my nemesis. With good advice from my far more expert riding buddy Nozza, I got a little better at it. But compared to him and to every other rider who has had the misfortune to accompany me, I'm so shit as to be a proper embarrassment to myself. So find those personal weak points and work on them now, because that particular stitch in time might well save you the taste of hospital food rather than just... Secondly, I'd suggest getting some professional training if you can afford it. There's loads of manufacturer-affiliated off-road training schools available, so you should be able to do a course on a school bike that is similar to or even the same as your own machine. You'll be amazed, even if you decide you'll never take your own machine off-road after all, just how much the experience improves your tarmac performance and safety. What's more, it's a heap of fun, and no matter how good you think you are, there's always something to learn. Thirdly, I'd say, don't go alone. These bikes are heavy, and a luggaged up 1250 GS full of fuel might be approaching 300 kilograms, and if it's landed awkwardly, even if you aren't trapped underneath it, you could find lifting it up on your own just isn't possible. You may ask why you would ever need to lift it up, and if you are asking that, I'd recommend you forget the whole idea and just stick to the roads.
Hello.
Our day continued mostly on long forest and mountain trails, some a little more technical than others, but nothing too tricky. Despite the ACT's promise of a testing time on the famed Smuggler's Trail, there was nothing to catch us out, and as I pointed out in the last episode, this was not least because it turned out that the ACT had got their facts wrong, since the Smuggler's route happens upon leaving Andorra if travelling east to west, not while approaching it. So the anticipation, enthusiastic in Nozza's case, nervous in mine, was all for nothing. We were bothered by the occasional shower of rain, but in the main we enjoyed some pretty good going, until we arrived in Andorra mid-afternoon when the heavens really did open. But also open was the city's KTM dealership, and that was a very good job. I said earlier that Noz had discovered a more serious problem with his 1190, and that problem turned out to be a completely collapsed front wheel bearing. With a level of service that neither of us have experienced back in Blighty, the two guys at this dealership, despite the fact that they were trying to get finished up because they were shutting shop and leaving for a few days, dropped everything and bent over backwards to help us out.
I beg your pardon?
They found they had the correct bearing in stock, but then also found that one of Nozza's wheel spacers had gone AWOL, or in reality was never present in the first place, perhaps explaining the demise of the bearing after 3,000 miles plus of rocky batterings. Undaunted, they immediately borrowed a spacer from one of the brand new bikes they had in the showroom and basically did everything they could to sort us out, even offering to hook up their diagnostic reader to Noz's bike to see if they could resolve the other issue to which I earlier referred. They seemed bemused by the question, "How much do you charge for the diagnostic?" Their answer being, "Nothing, of course. We don't charge people just because we've plugged in a computer and read a printout. We charge customers if we fix things, not if we're only telling them that something's wrong." What a refreshing contrast to the UK experience. In fact, they were so good that whilst waiting, I purchased a new helmet from them. Better yet, they even allowed us down into their workshop so we could see exactly when their mechanic was working on Noz's bike and when he was getting on with the half-dozen other jobs he had on the go. So that way, we would know we were not being charged for labour just because the bike had disappeared from view, but was actually sitting unattended. Once the bike was fixed, we found a hotel up in the forested hills above the city and stayed a night up there. The following morning, deciding to have a day off the bikes to allow some predicted foul weather to pass through. We knew we'd be riding at high altitude again and were hoping to drink in more of the Pyrenees' great views, so that cloud was going to have to clear. Also, I'd always wanted to have a closer look at Andorra, having only passed through on previous visits. This proved to be a very good move, as this attractive, friendly and vibrant city served up a treat of an attraction that suited the tastes of both Nozza and I in the form of its remarkable new Bikilab Andorra. Bikilab Andorra is a museum displaying an amazingly extensive collection of bicycles from every significant moment in the long history of that ubiquitous mode of transport. The collection is that of the Ribaragua family, and it's honestly quite incredible and so well presented, with a superb permanent exhibition further enhanced by rolling temporary themed exhibitions. Our visit coincided with a temporary exhibition focusing on the history of women's struggle for acceptance as cycle users in the early years of the machines and their ongoing campaign to becoming welcomed participants at the highest levels in the world of professional competitive cycling. Added to this are interactive experiences, including virtual reality static cycling and plenty of other visitor tools that might cause the Science Museum in London itself pause for thought. But the stars of the show are surely the extraordinary contraptions, not to say death traps, which were constructed when cycling was in its infancy and the direction of design was still very much to be decided, let alone optimised. So before you groan and imagine you would never waste a second of your life being bored witless in a bicycle museum, I implore you, should you find yourself in Andorra one day, to think again and take a few hours out to visit this very special place. You won't be disappointed. Other than that, the modern hotel we found down in the city for our second night was comfortable, affordable and extremely friendly, with a great breakfast and assurances that while we could spend money on parking, there was really no need, as in Andorra, vehicle crime was less likely than nuclear attack. The proliferation of guns in the city's shops suggested otherwise, as did Nozza's conviction that a certain gentleman following us through the streets on our way back from a nighttime meal and minor bar crawl in the city centre had murderous intent, with a view to mugging yours truly. The sight of a giant Nozza placing himself threateningly between myself and my would-be assailant, if that's what he was, caused the gentleman to cross the street, perhaps in pursuit of some easier, safer prey. So once again I had my mighty friend to thank for preventing a bop on the noggin and being relieved of my wallet. Or I didn't, I guess we'll never know. But it wouldn't surprise me if Nozza had indeed saved my sorry ass yet again. Something of a theme for the trip, it must be said. The other feature of Andorra, and its tax status no doubt fuels this, is the proliferation of tobacco shops offering massive cartons of duty-free snout. Are folks really so hell-bent on self-destruction that they'll visit this place just to indulge in that? But I, for one, enjoyed the general Andorra vibe. Facilities for children and young people in the parks and public spaces are second to none. The city is kept immaculately clean. There seems to be loads going on. The evening bar life was super friendly, even to the extent that when I expressed envy at the rider who had turned up in semi-formal evening wear astride his stunning brand new BMW S1000M motorcycle, his response to our drooling, once he'd shaken off the gaggle of over-enthusiastic teen boys demanding top speed figures and swooning teen girls seeking affirmation that attractiveness had finally defeated gawkiness, was to offer us the keys so that we could take it for a ride there and then, and he meant it. Had we not already been a beer or five down the road, we'd have taken him up on the offer. The only other place I've experienced such generosity of spirit was Monaco during a visit to the Grand Prix a few years back. Maybe some people owe their material success to popularity grown from their open-heartedness, rather than the lot of them being ruthless destroyers of rivals in the Succession mould. So there we have it then. Overall, a good experience in Andorra. And a final, less than entirely fond farewell to my ill-advised open-face helmet, which had seen my leathery old face peppered with gravel, rocks, hailstones and needles of rain for a good 3,000 miles to that point, which was around 3,000 miles too many, although it was good in the heat of southern Portugal, so not all negative. In the next episode, we tackle the notorious Smuggler's Trail, wonder what was so notorious about it, and meet up with a splendid gentleman and fellow rider who shared an uncanny history with Nozza in one respect, but also knew who Cheech and Chong were in another, and just when I'd begun to think that I was the only one left. So I'll bid you a fond farewell for now. Hope to see you again for episode 10, and as always, thank you so very much for watching. Happy trails and bye for now!